Hello everyone, I'm Ryan from 2 Car Pros, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to service your throttle body housing and plate for a 2002 Toyota Highlander 3.0 liter V6. The other two engines, the bigger V6, they made a little bit later in its life cycle in the inline 4. This also can apply to it, although it's going to look a little bit different. But if you do have a 3 liter V6, this is a perfect step-by-step guide. I explain everything you could possibly need for the vehicle. If you do have any questions, please leave them down below. Also, this video is going to be supplementary to a bigger video. I'm going to be doing the spark plugs for this vehicle very soon. Video-wise, I've already done the work, but I need to edit it. So you're gonna need to watch this video first to get to where the spark plug video starts, and then watch the rest of this video after the spark plug video concludes. I know it's a little bit confusing, but if I upload it twice, YouTube won't be too happy with me. So I have to kind of break the videos up a little bit. But if you're doing one job, you should really do the other as well, because you have to take the intake off in order to get to the rear spark plugs. And if you already have the throttle body housing off, you might consider doing those pain in the neck back plugs while you're at it. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right in. Okay, the first thing we're gonna do before we do anything or go any further is disconnect the negative battery terminal cable with a 10mm socket or wrench. Once it's nice and loose, we can lift up that and store it behind the battery so it will not make any sparks while we are working on the vehicle. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is remove this ABS box off the top of the crossbar. I'm unsure if this crossbar is an optional extra or not. So you might have it or you might not. My guess is it's a stock thing and it came with all these Highlanders. I'm unsure, but I do know that we can remove it by putting a screwdriver in here on this tab. You see that little tab right there? You want to put it in between there, and then you can wiggle the box back and forth like this and it'll come off its mount, and we can put that aside. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is remove this body clip here that actually holds the ABS box wire assembly to this cross member. And I don't have a body clip puller, so I'm just going to use some long nose pliers. And for any kind of plier, I always recommend Nipix. No, I'm not sponsored by them, although I wish I was. Just like that. Now the ABS box here is completely independent of that cross member, and we can set that ABS box aside. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is take off these two nuts right here and right here that hold the cross member to the top of the shock tower. And these nuts also hold the coilover assembly to the car. So when we remove these and we remove the cross member, I'm going to put these nuts right back on. So we're going to get our 14mm socket here. Set these aside, and we can do the other side now. So it looks like a bit of the wiring harness here attaches to this cross member. So we're gonna go ahead and unclamp it so we can move on. So on that tab there, I'm just gonna grab a screwdriver and pry up a little bit, and it should slide right off the mount, just like that. And now we can remove that cross member. Just like that. And you probably could do this repair without removing that cross member, but it's going to make things a lot easier. Look how much easier it is to access everything now. So that's why I say it's necessary. I know there's going to be some comments saying that's silly, but it's the way I'm doing it. Make it a little easier on us, right? So the next thing we can do is start focusing on removing the top of the airbox here. We don't have to remove the bottom of the airbox, it's not really in our way, but it's going to be really easy to remove the top of the airbox. So we're going to unplug the sensor here, we're going to unplug this housing here, and you just push down on the electrical connector safeties and just kind of walk them off. Sometimes they can be a little stubborn. There we go. We can remove, I believe this is an evap line here. Grab some channel locks, move the hose clamp down a little bit, and then we can pull the line off. Just like that, nice and easy. Now we can loosen that hose clamp there with a 10mm socket or a Phillips head screwdriver. I like the socket. One of the nice things about working on Japanese cars is Most things are 10 millimeters, so that's nice. And we can remove the intake tube just like that. You can just push it straight back like that, like I did, and you're all good to go there. So now we can pull these lines off and be gentle. They're just little itty bitty lines, and you don't want to screw those up by yanking the end off or something. So you can just pull straight back like that. And then we can put those kind of out of our way. Next thing we can do is pull this crankcase pressure tube off of the intake, and it just pulls straight off. There's no Okay, the next thing we can do is pop the top of the air box off, like we're going to change the air cleaner. The throttle cable looks like it comes through a little clip here. You can just force that out like that, and then you can remove the top of the air box. And then we're going to remove the air cleaner too, just so we don't ruin it while we're working on it. We can pull this line off here, off of the intake. Again, be gentle with it. You can try twisting it first, so make sure it comes off evenly. It doesn't shred the line. And then we need to loosen those two hose clamps with our 10 millimeter socket, our Phillips head screwdriver. Okay, so your intake tubes might be a little stuck, especially if they've never been taken off. Just be gentle with them because you don't want to shred them. There we go. Try twisting them too, that seems to help. And we can remove the intake boot. Okay, the next thing we need to do is focus on the throttle cable here. This is the throttle that the cable that connects to your actual foot pedal in the cab, and this wire, this cable here, is what connects to your cruise control module. And they both come out the same way. We're gonna rock this throttle armature back like this, and then we're gonna grab the slack of the cable and slide it out to the left like that. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is remove this plastic cover plate here. You need a size 5 Allen, and you need to remove them. I'm actually just going to let them kind of sit in the housing here, and they'll come out when I remove the plastic housing. Like that, but it still won't come off, so rotating this Toyota emblem a little bit, get our fingers underneath it, and lift that up, and then we can remove the housing as a whole. And now we can remove the throttle cable for the cruise control as well, and we just articulate the armature here like we did on the normal throttle until it is slack. Sorry if my hand's in the way, but sometimes it's the only way you can get something out. What a bugger. There we go. Just like that. Next thing we're going to do is loosen this nut here on the cruise control throttle wire, and I'm using a 12 millimeter line wrench so I don't round the nut. And we only want to loosen it just a tiny bit because we don't want the adjustment to be off. So that way when we put it back on, we can just tighten it a little bit and it's all good. So once this is free, don't touch these nuts because you don't want to get the adjustment wrong. We can just store that aside and not worry about it, and then we're all good. We can do the same thing here for the regular throttle cable. Just going to loosen it a tiny bit on this side and then shimmy it out, and then don't touch these nuts again, and we can store this out of our way so we don't accidentally bump it. The next thing we're going to do is get some of these vacuum lines off. Again, they're very fragile, so be careful with them. You don't need to remove this one here because it goes into a throttle plenum. You can't see it. Very good. Okay, I'm just going to rip this one off. This is where a hook tool becomes very handy. You can get these vacuum lines off without destroying them, which is what you want, just like that. We can remove that out of its little guides there. And we can do the same for these two vacuum lines up top. A lot of vacuum lines in this thing. There we go. And then we can get some channel locks here and get up on this vacuum line for the brake booster. Back the hose clamp up. and then walk the line off. Just like that. Okay, the next thing we're going to focus on is this electrical connector here. We need to remove this, so pinch the safety and walk it back, just like that. So you just push down right where my thumb is. And set that aside. There we go. So I was stripping this Phillips head. I have no idea why they chose to use a Phillips head freaking screw, but they did. What you can do is get a pair of channel locks and grab the outside of the screw head. That will give you much more power. And you can remove the screws. And we can remove this right here. There we go. Make sure we get that O-ring there to not go anywhere. And we can set that aside. Now we can remove this throttle electrical connector here. The safety is basically where my pointer finger is. And we can pull that straight back. And you'll notice that there is 2 body clips holding it in place. So you can use a pair of needle nose pliers, or a body clip puller works especially good. And once you get the top one done, you realize there's another one down below. Just like that. Put that down there and away from us. Next, we're going to remove that line right there and grab a pair of needle nose here. They have a little bit more surface area than like a pair of channel locks would. That way you can walk that hose clamp back. And then we can take the line off. It's actually a coolant pass-through line, so coolant passes through the throttle housing to heat it up and make combustion easier. So, you might be asking, do we have to drain the coolant? If you follow the shop manual, yes you do, but there is a trick I can teach you right now. So there's going to be coolant coming out of this coolant pass-through, and the way we do that, to stem that without draining the coolant, you could just drain the coolant if you want to make things a little bit easier on yourself, but this is kind of the workaround here. And this should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. Do not work on any coolant system with the system under pressure, or AKA when it's hot. So check for that. We're going to grab some vice grips here, and I've affixed some tubing to the end of the jaws so the jaws don't puncture the line. And my dad taught me this trick. It's pretty cool. We're just going to pinch that line cut. Actually, that was a little light. We need to tighten that up a little bit. We're just going to pinch that line shut like that, and that way when we pull that line off, it won't be shooting coolant this way. It'll still be coming out that way. That is what these caps are for. You can buy these at any auto parts store. They all have them. They're nothing special. I got mine off Amazon. So I'm going to pull that off, install our cap, and look at that, minimal spillage. And you can see that our vice grip is working really well to keep the coolant nice and corralled. That's a neat trick. Yeah. So there we go. You can see that the line is nice and stopped, and that plug is keeping any more coolant from seeping out. That's a neat trick, right? My dad taught me that one. Unfortunately, it's going to kind of be in our way for the duration of this repair. That's okay. Easier than draining the coolant, in my opinion, my humble opinion. So if that is one side of the line, that means there is another coolant pass-through, and it's over here. Okay, once we remove this line here, there is no coolant in this one, so that you can just set that aside, but there's going to be coolant in this lower tube. So we're gonna grab our vice grips and pinch that one off too. And I have taped up the jaws so they're a little easier on the line itself. Just like that, so that will pinch off the coolant on that line. And it's a little hard to see, but there is a hose clamp behind here. I know you can't really see it, I'm sorry. So you see the hose clamp we're working on there? It is right there. And we're gonna put some not paper towels, but shop towels down there to catch some of the coolant. But once it's done dribbling, that's it, so, because we already have it pinched off. Okay, it took me a little while to get that hose clamp off the barb there, but it should be cleared now. I just used a little pair of channel locks and a lot of patience. So we can remove that line now. And you can see that this line did have coolant in it, but our vice grip solution fixed that from spilling everywhere. So, and we want to remember which order those hoses go in. Actually, I'm pretty sure they can only go in the one way, so no worries there. The next thing we're going to do is remove this plate on top of the throttle housing, and those are held in with Phillips head screws for some strange reason. Okay, remove this plate. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is take a 12mm socket and remove this guide here for the cruise control cable here. Oh, need a little extension. Just like that. And set that aside. See that nut down there? It's a 12mm nut. It is stupid hard to get to. That's why I removed that bracket earlier. And this is where it pays to have a ratcheting wrench handy. I even sprayed a little bit of WD-40 to kind of help it along. I want to start off with the hardest to get one first. That way the rest of them hold it up for you, just like that. And there's only 3 bolts holding the throttle housing extension to the intake manifold. Okay, now we're going to use just a regular ratchet. Okay, so there is another bolt on the back side of this housing. I can't really show it to you unless my mirror gets really lucky here. Anyway, it's down there. I will show you after I've removed it. With that little forget you bolt out, we can finally remove the throttle body housing. Oh, spoke too soon. There's a little vacuum line here we need to pull off. We can't forget to put that back on when we're replacing it. For those of you wondering what I was unbolting on the back end, it went into this thread here, and it went through this, and it went through this mount here. It serves as nothing else but a mount. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Funny though. It's a good one. I don't think I've ever seen it in mount like this. I think it's an auxiliary mount for this line here, but it already has one down here. I don't know why that would be there. That just seems superfluous to me. You can remove the gasket too and inspect it to make sure it is in good shape like this one is. If your gasket is in poor shape, you need to replace it. But I think we can clean this one and put it right back in, it'll be fine. Alright, so we have the throttle housing here on my workbench. As you can see, it is held in with what looks like 6 Phillips head screws for some strange reason instead of hex-headed bolts. Don't ask me why. I'm not 100% sure. So we got to get those out. I recommend a very large, sort of wide diameter Phillips head here. It's gonna kind of just suck no matter what to try to get that out. There we go. Lord knows why they used Phillips heads. Now remember, this long one here, this long one came out of this hole right here, so you need to keep track of which screw came out of where, which bolt came out of where. So keep track of, you know, the long ones versus the short ones. I think that is the only long one, and maybe there's another one right here. Okay, there's another long one right here, so that's pretty easy to keep track of where those go. That side looks pretty good. And then this one right here, these two. Just like that. Yes, more coolant. Okay. Well, we can take one of the throttle housings off like this. Might blurp up a little bit of coolant, that's okay. Just make sure these O-rings in here are okay on this side. See that little O-ring just there? And then there's a gasket right here as well. Just make sure this gasket's in good shape, like we talked about earlier with everything else. And this gasket's in fantastic shape, so we're just gonna clean it pretty easy. Oh, it's just was stuck on. Okay, fair enough. And we got this side off too, making sure all our applicable O-rings all look good, if there's any. I don't think there was on this side. Yeah. So again, check the gasket, make sure it's all good, and then we're going to clean it and put it back. So basically this entire job is cleaning things and putting it back together. Just this one was a little more roundabout than I thought it was going to be. So now that the coolant is out, we can remove our plugs here. These were installed by me. So I gotta make sure there's no O-rings or anything sitting. An O-ring fell out on me right there. It was on my workbench. You can probably see it in the footage. And we can look at the other side to see where that O-ring went. It went right here. Yeah, it's pretty easy. So I'm actually probably going to take both of those O-rings out and examine them, because it would really, really stink if that was the cause of a leak. I don't think it would be, but because these O-rings look fine. Yeah, these are in good shape. We'll put those aside and reuse them. Be very gentle with removing your O-rings. That one also looks just fine, so we're going to reuse that one. Next thing we're going to do is get some carburetor spray. Spray it all in there in the throttle housing, and we're going to clean all around there. We're going to make that look brand new. You can see that already looks better in there. On the back side there is a bit of coking. That's what that copper looking stuff is. So we can get some carb spray in there and really clean it up. We want to make this looking good, so we're going to do that for both of these. See how nice and new that already looks? So we're going to do that for both of these, and they're also going to clean the mating surfaces on both and the gaskets on both. So do that for both of these, and I'll turn the camera back on when that is finished. Alright, we're going to assemble the right one first. So the first thing we're going to do is drop in our O-ring, just like that, nice and clean. And we're going to replace our gasket. It is also nice and clean. Everything needs to be clean. And we can replace the throttle body. A piece of the throttle housing here. Like that. And then we got to put the long screws back where the long screws go. Luckily there's only 2 of them, and they're both on the bottom, so they're not too bad. And then on the top one, there is a shorty. And we can tighten all those up. There we go. That's what that should look like when it is all finished, put back together. Now we can work on the left side here, making sure our gasket's nice and clean and flat and there's no cracks in it. Ah, it's very nice. Before we get to that, get a little ahead of myself, I gotta put our clean O-ring back. That looks good. We can put our gasket back there. Oh, that's lovely. And then we can put this back on. There we go. Luckily everything only goes on the one way. There's really no other way for it to go on. It's not like Legos where you can build it wrong. It only really goes back together one way most of the time. There's a couple cases where it hasn't, but so far so good. There we go. And just to make sure we want both of these to relate to each other evenly, we can actuate the throttle here and they both go evenly, which is what you want. So this is actually ready to go back in the car. Alright, next thing we're going to do is grab our gasket we just cleaned and affix it to the plenum here. It only really goes on the one way. Make sure that's nice and aligned, and then we can put this on. We put the throttle housing on, just like this. Oh yeah. Put on the nuts, finger tight. that. So the bolt, or the stud on the bottom, the nut, I rounded it into oblivion taking it off, so I have a replacement one here, but I also need a washer, so those are going to go together to work. It's the same exact thread and pitch, and yeah, and will work just fine. So I'm going to put that on the bottom side so you can't quite see it. Ha ha ha. Okay, so all three nuts are now tightened, including that one I kind of had to improvise on the bottom, that's why it's on the bottom. And now we can re-plug in our vacuum lines here on the top. Like that for one. For two. And now we can replace that throttle support bracket? Throttle cable bracket. Actually, it's a cruise control throttle cable bracket, if you want to be Mr. Fancy Science. Luckily there's like a pilot tab right there. It'll indicate how it should be positioned, so that's nice. I'm going to tighten that up. Just tighten up is good. Like that, make sure that's not going anywhere. And now we can reattach our cruise control cable here. And remember, we only backed out the left nut. We're going to keep the right nut tight, so that way the positioning of the cable isn't off. There we go, like that. Make sure that's not going anywhere, and it's not, but the cable can still. And we can actuate the cruise control armature here to make it easier to push place back in its home. There we go. And you do have to actuate it. It is basically impossible to get it back in this position, so that means it's impossible to fall out. That's basically why that is. And we're going to reattach the throttle cable here. Make sure this goes back into its home nicely. Like this. And you don't want it to slide out like that. You really want it to be in its home, wedged that way as far as possible. And then we need to actuate the throttle backward like this, or open, so we can snake the cable in there thusly. Just like that. Okay, we need to replace the coolant line here that runs up to right where the end of my finger is, and that hose clamp needs to be behind the barb so it doesn't fall off. Okay, so we got that coolant line right there, right there, on there, and the barb, the hose clamp is behind the barb, so we are all set. I know it's really tough to see, I'm really sorry, but it's right there. Next thing we can do is replace the vacuum line that goes to the brake booster. We can replace that like this. Just like that. It's not going anywhere. And then we can plug this back in like this. This only plugs in one way, so that's good. Like that. Install that there, like that. Very good. Next thing we're going to do is replace this vacuum line here onto here. Just like that. That, like that. We're going to install that idler air control valve motor here. And for the astute watching, you'll notice that I am using different mounting hardware than came standard with the vehicle, because Phillips heads in this application, in my opinion, is very stupid. And I stripped them all to oblivion, so yeah, I had some, I think they're M5 and 5 bolts laying around. They fit perfectly, and that's what we'll be using for today. If you did not strip your Phillips heads somehow, feel free to reuse them. And we can plug that back in, that bad boy, like that, and we can move on. All right, this next operation, we want to be kind of quick, a little swift, because we're reattaching that coolant pass-through line. So as soon as I take these vice grips off, it might gush a little bit of coolant. So we're going to want to get it on quick. Yeah, it's okay. And then we can get our hose clamp here. We can get rid of that. And we're going to make sure that the hose clamp is behind the barb like that. It needs to look just like that. All right, we can replace our intake boot here. Like that. Next thing we're going to do is tighten the hose clamps here. Make sure that our hoses don't go anywhere. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is replace this crankcase pressure tube. Like that, making sure that the hose clamp is behind the barb. Okay, we put our filter material in here like this. And it does have a square side, so the filter only goes in the one way, with the square side being up here, in case you didn't know that. And then we can put our top of our air box back in, making sure our vacuum lines are out of the way, and our cable, our throttle cable, is not being crushed either, because we want that to have easy access. Like that. Push that out of the way. Make sure the clamps for the airbox are out of the way. Put that back down. Snap the clamps for the airbox back in their place, like that. And then we need to put the intake boot back on the airbox. Thusly, like that. Make sure that hose clamp is nice and tight. Then we can plug in the mass airflow sensor, which is this big wide flat connector that just presses right on like that. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is plug this tube back in here. Moves that hose clamp into its position that you can't see due to angles, just believe me. And then we can plug that back in, just like that. We're going to plug these vacuum lines back in the way we had marked them earlier. The orientation is super important, but it might be, so you know, we're just going to plug it in exactly the way we found it, along with all the other vacuum lines. Let me give you guys a quick tour of the vacuum lines here. So this vacuum line goes up into here, gets clamped into here. We didn't take this vacuum line off. This one goes here. These two fork into this one. And then we can't forget our friend way down there on that diaphragm. You're just gonna have to trust me. This vacuum line goes down there into that brass diaphragm. I was a little confused earlier. I thought it went up into here. I got that totally wrong. I had to look up diagram. And this vacuum line goes into here on the intake boot. And then of course the 3 we just plugged in. And I think those are all the vacuum lines we unplugged. Look around to make sure that there are no vacuum lines just flopping around in the wind, because they need to all be where they belong. It might even be worth for you to take photos of where all the vacuum lines went, so you can reference them in the future. Next, we're going to replace our crossbar here. Goes in like this. Make sure our ABS module's out of the way. We can also plug in that little wiring harness mount here. Wiring harness mount, it just clips on. It's really easy. And then over here, nuts need to be tightened. And then we can put this ABS relay box, back on. It just snaps into place like that. And you can't forget the cover, so you can't see your ignition coils. So we'd want to look at those. And those are size 5 Allen. Don't do them very tight because they're not really holding anything. They're just holding plastic to the valve cover. So, you know, don't wing it on insanely tight. And we can't forget our prestigious Toyota logo. Oh yes. There we go. We need to reconnect our battery. We're going to touch the negative terminal once here to make sure there's no sparks, and there's not. So we can replace the negative here and retighten it and ensure it's properly seated all the way down. Yeah, make sure that's not going anywhere, and there you go. So that is how to clean and service your throttle body housing and plate for an 02 3-liter V6 Toyota Highlander. It's pretty approachable. The only thing you really have to worry about is stripping those Phillips head screws. Once you've gotten those out of the way and you've gotten a decent diameter screwdriver on, it's not that bad. But what you want to make sure you do is you have a screwdriver that's long enough too, because if you have a longer screwdriver, you can tell more or less if this screwdriver is on square. And it doesn't hurt to have a wide diameter Phillips head set. I would actually buy quite a few of them because you're really going to need it for this job. You're probably not going to be able to get away with whatever screwdrivers you just have lying around. They're a little particular, and I really don't have good sizes for screwdrivers. It's not like, there are screwdriver sizes, but they're not really commonly known. So it's not like during the video I could call out, oh yeah, this is a 17mm screwdriver. It's really not something I can do on the fly, but I did call out the bolt sizes as you saw. This is a service everybody should do every once in a while. If I had to put a number on it, maybe every 40,000 miles, it's really not that bad. Because if there's too much coking on the back of those plates, it can cause all kinds of problems. Not so much on these cars that are cable driven, but the newer cars that are drive-by-wire, they're driven by an electrical signal, they play all kinds of havoc. But it's important to do it on these cable driven units as well. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you're subscribed. I upload every Saturday at 11 or so Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.